Well, I'll call to order the June 3rd, 2020 land use public hearing. And please join me in a pledge of allegiance. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Now is the time that has been set aside to consider an application by Sarah Pursley and Kathleen Higdon, representatives of C. Graves Estate, to remove a historic landmark overlay on property located at 17800 Springwater Road. The hearing will proceed as follows. We'll first hear from staff presentation from Senior Planner Anthony Reeder. Okay. The applicant will then have 15 minutes to present. Although this applicant has indicated that they do not wish to make a formal presentation. Next, I will open a hearing for the public testimony, beginning with public officials who will have 5 minutes. Then representatives from recognized community planning organizations and agencies will have 3 minutes. Finally, other people wishing to testify will have 3 minutes each. The board will then deliberate and either render a decision today or set a date specific in the future. Assisting us in the hearing is our clerk, Mary Rathke, Senior Planner Anthony Reeder, Assistant County Counsel Nate Boderman. Assisting us with the broadcast are Garrett Teague, Rich Marvin, Kevin Galusha. Today, we are holding this land use hearing virtually. If you've joined us on the Zoom app for this meeting and you are interested in providing public comment, we'll prompt you regarding how to do this when the time is right. The Zoom link and instructions to participate via Zoom are located at clackamas.us/meeting/BCC/land use. You will have an option to provide your comments to us live during the public comment portion of this meeting. Be sure to include your name and area where you live. We will now begin the hearing with a legal statement by Nate Boderman, followed by a planning staff presentation of the report and recommendation. And with that, Nate.
Good morning again. Now's the time set for the public hearing for the previously identified application. The hearing this morning is a quasi-judicial hearing, which for the commissioners means that you're sitting in your capacity as a decision maker, deciding the merits of this particular application. And for those wishing to participate, two important things that I'll note. First, all of the criteria that can be used in reaching a decision have been identified in the staff report. Testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the criteria identified in that staff report or other relevant criteria found in the comprehensive plan or other land use regulation that the person believes may apply to this decision. Accordingly, please direct your testimony to a relevant approval criterion. Second, failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and parties an opportunity to respond to an issue may preclude appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Once final, these decisions may be appealed to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals. At this time, I'll ask if any of the commissioners wish to disclose any ex parte contacts, bias, or conflicts of interest in connection with this particular application.
No.
Okay, seeing none. If anybody today wishes to challenge the impartiality of any commissioner, please clearly indicate your intent to do so in any written or oral testimony that you may provide. Thank you for bearing with me this morning. That's a statutorily required disclosure that we must read in these types of hearings. So that's it for me. I will turn it over to Anthony with the Planning Division.
Thank you. Anthony.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Anthony Reeder, Senior Planner with the Planning Program. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared here for the presentation. Is that coming through okay for everyone?
Yes.
Great. So as was previously identified, this is Z054619-HL. It's a historic overlay zone removal on the Kirchham Farm. The subject property is on the north. Is it still advancing? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, but our paper says it's Z.
It is. That's a typo. It's a typo on my slide. Z is correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So the subject property is zoned EFU and is located on the north side of Springwater Road. Although the property in total is 64 acres, it's only that southeastern, I guess, portion that is it has the historic overlay on it. The property is known in our inventory of local historic sites as the William and Lottie Kirchham Farm. It was designated as a historic landmark in 1994. The process that a property goes through to be nominated and designated as historic landmark is an evaluation on a number of different rating kind of criteria. And in order to qualify, a property has to reach at least 40 rating points and then can go on to be nominated. When it was designated, the property met that threshold. Between when it was nominated and designated in 1994 and 2017, and really 2020 for that matter, the agricultural buildings on the site deteriorated and were lost, and the home was modified, reducing the historic character and resources on the property. And this is important because when originally nominated, it was nominated on the basis of being an intact agricultural site and based on the architectural character of the house as a vernacular home. Taking a look at the site itself, you can see in the site plan that was drawn with the original nomination paperwork how there is a collection of agricultural buildings that surround the farmhouse itself. The aerial on the right dates to 2018, and you can see that a number of those, the majority of those buildings have been lost, some to deterioration, and in some cases to catastrophic loss by fire. One of the other criteria, or one of the other elements on the site that was notable in the nomination was the architectural character and quality of the house as a vernacular style farmhouse. Over the years, key character defining elements of that building have been removed and modified and replaced with products of a more contemporary manufacturer. So the original woodlap siding has been replaced with with vinyl siding. The original double hung windows have been replaced with contemporary vinyl ones, as well as the doors, porches, and other building elements. Although these images are kind of blurry, the intention is to show the kind of contemporary and modern materials in place on the site. So as I mentioned before, in order to qualify for the historic landmark overlay zoning, a site must achieve a minimum of 40 points under those required criteria in section 707. When originally nominated and designated, the property did. Staff analysis of the current condition of the property is such that it would receive perhaps 29 points on that same point scale, putting it below that 40-point threshold. If the site were to be nominated today, staff does not believe it would qualify for designation as a historic landmark. So in terms of the zone change criteria that would apply to the site, this is governed by Chapter 9 and Policy 4 of the Comprehensive Plan, which basically says we are to zone properties historic landmark or districts or corridors when determined significant based on those evaluation criteria. As I previously addressed, the site no longer meets the threshold to be considered historically significant. The other relevant criteria the other potential criteria in section 1202 relates to service provision and impacts on the transportation system. What's being proposed here is the removal of an overlay zone and not a change to the base EFU zoning. So no new development would be authorized that aren't already allowed under that existing underlying EFU zone. Staff presented the proposal to the Historic Review Board in mid-March. No significant issues were brought up either by the public or by the board members at that meeting, and they voted unanimously to recommend approval of the proposal. Staff additionally finds that the HL overlay zone is no longer appropriate for the subject site because of the deterioration and loss of the historic farmstead buildings, as well as modifications to the main house itself, and also recommends approval of Z054619Z to remove the overlay zone. That's the end of my formal presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, I have a couple. For one thing, did the remodel of the home require a building permit? So
commonly, alterations to a home or to a building would. We did take a look at the permit history. Some of the changes, virtually all the changes, we couldn't find a permit history to track back to. It's not unheard of for some of these types of modifications to be done outside of the permitting process.
Yeah, siding, for example. Do you normally have to get a permit to put siding on? I don't think so, do you?
I don't believe you normally need a building permit. The section 707 would require a land use approval for a historic site, but frequently, or at least sometimes, owners are either unaware that their property has that overlay zoning or just opt not to go through that land use process.
I hope you guys in the future will consider strengthening these things. I mean, this is a historic site that's been altered and is no longer historic for no reason whatsoever, except lack of care and doing things to devalue historic value of the property. That's a shame. Paul, did you want to add something?
Yeah, well, I want to just maybe ask a clarifying question. I don't disagree with where you're going with this, Jim. I don't have a problem with this particular application, but I guess in the future, my question is, I think Jim asked a question, you don't need a permit for siding, or I think those are considered maintenance. My question is more specific. Is there a different requirement or guidelines to follow for historic property for those kinds of improvements that are different or unique than it would be for a typical residential property?
There are, relative to the zoning code and to a land use approval, there are not necessarily the difference in terms of the building permit and building code process. There's not a difference there, but there is a land use review that is required under section 707 of our zoning code when a property is zoned with that historic overlay.
Okay. Yeah, I over the years, I have heard many people concerned about, protecting some of our historic properties. And I think one would presume when someone applies to have their property as such for historic values, that they're being the stewards of that very purpose. And, and I guess at the same time subjecting themselves to maybe some added costs and responsibilities by doing so. But, I do know that sometimes the community, the nearby community or whether they're nearby or not, are, really value some of that history and culture of the county. So I just wanted to state that that's a value that I frequently hear more of than I do people wanting to remove a property from. Thank you.
Commissioner Schrader.
Yeah, I wanted to ask one question. So the property is a Clackamas County Historic Landmark and it's not on the National Register of Historic Places.
That's correct.
Okay. With the National Register designation, there are more limitations on what you can do to the exterior of buildings of this sort. And there are more stringent requirements. to get that kind of designation. We used to have back in the day a very, very robust historic preservation program that was under Pam Hayden of Planning and Peggy Sigler. And they have identified, and I don't know where the files are, Jennifer, every historic landmark in the entire county. And I agree, this is a shame, but there is no teeth in, I don't think there's any real legal teeth in requiring people at the county level to do this. But what we had done is that we had offered support. We actually had grants available at the time. I know our farm got one for barn restoration. We had staff that would go, Pam would physically go out and visit buildings and get people, point them to places with architects, with historic preservation folks, with people who are able to help people understand and do restoration of these properties. And that program, when she retired, has not been very active. I actually think it's just gone. And unfortunately, with the budget issues we're having now, I certainly would like to see something like that back have a historic preservation specialist planner in our department, but I don't see that happening given the budget issues that we're facing at this time. But it might be something in the future that we consider again, is to really beef that up, have it be more robust, have a planner who is more active in that arena with a specialty area. There are a number of people that go to University of Oregon for their historic preservation master's degree, coupled with a planning degree that would be useful. But I'm not trying to cast blame. It's just that as resources have dwindled, we have not prioritized this as a commission. But there was a time when it was a very high priority. That was the late 90s and the early 2000s, actually. And then when Pam retired, it was, we did not have an internal advocate anymore at the planning level. So anyway.
All right, any other questions?
Commissioner Humberston?
Well, Martha covered most of what I wanted to say, but I would just like to comment that if somebody purchases an historic property, there's a special responsibility that goes with that. And if we are able to resurrect some historic planning rules and regulations, that concept ought to be included in the language. That's a special responsibility when it comes to purchasing an historic property. And I'll leave it at that.
All right, no other questions. We'll open the public hearing for public testimony and ask if anyone's here to testify on this matter. Mary?
I see no hands raised.
All right, then we'll close the public hearing and I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the application.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, so there's a motion and a second to approve Z0546-19. Is it Z or HL?
It is Z.
It is a Z, okay. As recommended by staff and the County Historic Review Board. Any further discussion?
Just briefly, Chair, I just want to build on what Commissioner Schrader had said and actually the comments from Commissioner Humberston. I would say that I would especially be concerned and agree if there was any kind of grants or any kind of public monies that were, I mean, even our staff time that went into historic preservation, but especially with public dollars for construction or modification thereof, that we actually are, better stewards of that entire effort and those dollars.
Yeah, but somehow you gotta let people know that it is historic. And you can't, if you could put something like that on the title, or maybe it's a plaque on the building that lets people know, but a realtor responsibility should be to mention that it's historic or the person selling it. But anyway,
That should be part of the disclosures. Absolutely.
Well, we did have plaques. We have plaques in the National Trust, and we also gave plaques in Heritage Tree plaques. As I said, the issue is that it used to be more of a proactive piece. So Pam would literally visit people and talk to them, and it was more of it really was a priority. And without that kind of outreach, it's hard for people to know and to understand half the time what they have.
Yeah.
And so anyway.
When I first got here, we were doing the historic tree.
Right, I remember. Yeah.
And that went away too. All right, so it's been moved and seconded. Mary, would you take a roll?
Yes, I will. Commissioner Fisher.
Aye.
Commissioner Humberston.
Aye.
Commissioner Savas.
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
And Chair Bernard.
Aye, motion carries unanimously. Now that the request has been approved, I'll direct staff to draft an ordinance reflecting today's decision and include it on the agenda for this board's adoption in a future business meeting. And with that, I will close the hearing on Z0546-19Z and adjourn the meeting and see you guys all tomorrow. Thank you.